Imagine living a life of jaw-dropping luxury, private islands, fleets of supercars, gold-plated everything, a world where every desire is met with a swipe of a black card. But what if that very lifestyle came with a deadly twist? From magnates meeting their end in unimaginable ways to heirs trapped in fatal extravagance, these stories prove that wealth can't shield anyone from fate. Get ready to uncover chilling deaths where extreme opulence turned into the ultimate nightmare.
A sonic boom heard across the state. The aftermath, this scene of wreckage and 4 people dead. Fighter planes intercepted an aircraft, or at least trying to, at 3:20 p.m. yesterday. The pilot was found to be unresponsive.
On a quiet Sunday afternoon in June 2023, the skies over Virginia carried a chilling secret. A sleek private jet cut across the clouds, its path smooth but strangely silent. 4 souls were on board. 49-year-old New York real estate powerhouse Adina Azarian, her miracle 2-year-old daughter Aria, their devoted nanny Ivadne Smith, and the highly experienced pilot Jeff Hefner. What should have been a simple family trip would soon unravel into a mid-air mystery that left aviation experts baffled, communities shaken, and families forever broken. Adina wasn't just another name in the real estate world. She was a force. For over 2 decades, she carved her way into Manhattan's toughest market before expanding to the Hamptons, where million-dollar listings became her specialty. To clients, she was unstoppable, but behind her success was a story tinged with both loss and redemption. After a turbulent childhood, she was adopted at 40 by John and Barbara Rumpel, a couple who had tragically lost their teenage daughter in a scuba diving accident back in 1994. For the Rumpels, Adina's fire and determination filled a void they thought could never be healed. For Adina, it was the family she had always longed for, but her greatest joy was Aria. That little girl was a miracle, born after years of heartbreak. On June 4th, 2023, the family boarded a Cessna 560 Citation 5, piloted by Jeff Hefner, a seasoned captain with more than 25,000 hours of flight experience and decades at Southwest Airlines. He knew the skies better than most, but 15 minutes after takeoff, something went wrong. Air traffic control lost communication. Their calls echoed unanswered. The jet continued climbing, reaching 34,000 feet, then stayed locked in place, on autopilot, with no human response from inside. What came next only deepened the nightmare. The aircraft sailed past its destination, then turned almost completely around, slicing back across Washington, D.C., drifting straight into restricted airspace. 6 F-16 fighter jets were scrambled at supersonic speeds, their roar triggering a sonic boom that rattled homes and left people on the ground wondering what had just happened. When the fighter pilots intercepted, what they saw inside the cockpit was haunting. The captain slumped lifeless in his seat. No one else moved. The cabin was still, silent, as if time itself had stopped. Then, at 3:22 p.m., the jet plummeted. From a steady cruise, it spiraled violently, dropping over 30,000 feet per minute until it slammed into the remote woods near Montebello, Virginia. The impact was catastrophic. When rescue teams finally reached the site, the jet was gone, shattered into fragments so small that nothing larger than an arm remained of the wreckage. There were no survivors. The investigation brought clarity, but not comfort. Experts concluded the cause was hypoxia, a silent killer in the sky. Investigators later discovered troubling signs. The plane had known issues with its pressurization system. Maintenance problems were documented. Repairs weren't made. And in a cruel twist, the pilot's oxygen mask was missing entirely. The tragedy was more than just an aviation disaster. It was a devastating human loss. In 1999, Payne Stewart stood at the pinnacle of his life. At 42 years old, he was not only one of the most recognizable figures in golf, but also one of its most beloved. His flamboyant knickers, colorful outfits, and trademark ivy caps made him stand out on the course, but it was his graceful swing and showmanship that had cemented his place in the game's history. Just 4 months earlier, he had secured his 3rd major title at the U.S. Open, completing a career-defining comeback. He was a devoted husband, a proud father of 2, and a man who seemed to have it all. On the morning of October 25th, 1999, Payne boarded a Learjet 35 in Orlando, bound for Dallas and eventually Houston for the Tour Championship. With him were his agent, Robert Fraley, Van Arden from Leader Enterprises, and golf course architect Bruce Borland. In the cockpit were experienced pilots Michael Kling and Stephanie Bellegarrigue. It was supposed to be a routine flight. It was supposed to be another step in Payne's triumphant season, but within minutes of takeoff, everything began to unravel. At 9:19 a.m., the Learjet lifted smoothly into the air. 8 minutes later, the crew acknowledged instructions to climb to 39,000 feet. That was the last time anyone ever heard from the aircraft. 6 minutes later, air traffic controllers tried to make contact again. Silence. They tried over and over. No answer. The plane flew on, unresponsive, locked in its course. By 10:52 a.m., the situation was dire enough that the military scrambled F-16s to intercept. When one pilot pulled alongside the Learjet, the sight was chilling. The windows weren't clear. They were frosted over, coated in ice from the inside. He could see no movement in the cockpit, no signs of life, no acknowledgement of his presence. The plane looked intact, its engines still humming, but inside it was already a tomb. For nearly 4 hours, the Learjet drifted on autopilot, covering more than 1,500 miles and passing silently over 6 states. Fighter jets took turns shadowing it, confirming the same grim truth. Everyone on board was unconscious, lost to hypoxia. Cabin depressurization had struck shortly after takeoff, sucking away the oxygen and leaving passengers and crew helpless within minutes. It was a death that came not with panic, but with silence, as consciousness slipped away and the plane carried them forward like ghosts in the sky. At 1:11 p.m., the jet could go no further. Its fuel spent, it began to spiral downward, a helpless descent that ended in a lonely field near Mayan, South Dakota. The impact was catastrophic. All 6 lives were gone in an instant. The news rippled across the sporting world like a thunderclap. Payne Stewart, flamboyant, fearless, unforgettable, was gone. His memorial service just days later was filled with athletes, fans, and friends. PGA Tour players honored him in the only way that felt fitting, by wearing his iconic knickers during the Tour Championship. Stuart Appleby even wore one of Payne's own outfits, given to him by Payne's widow, Tracy. The moment was heartbreaking, yet deeply symbolic. A final bow to a man who had made golf larger than life.
Remember this luxury super yacht that sunk off the coast of Sicily? It's only now just being brought to the surface. But why has it taken 11 months to do it? In 2024, the 56-metre-long Mayan sank during a thunderstorm, killing 7 people.
August 19th, 2024. Just off the coast of Porticello, a quiet fishing village in northern Sicily, the sea concealed a nightmare no one on board saw coming. Anchored offshore was the Mayan, a 56-meter superyacht gleaming with luxury. On board were 22 people, 12 guests and 10 crew, there to celebrate what was supposed to be a new beginning for tech billionaire Mike Lynch. Only days earlier, he had been cleared of serious legal trouble. This trip was meant to be a release, a sigh of relief after years of tension. With him were his wife Angela and their 18-year-old daughter Hannah, a bright student preparing to begin her studies at Oxford. Close friends were there too, Jonathan and Judy Bloomer, Chris and Nidita Murillo, and others who had stood beside Lynch through stormy times. That weekend they gathered not for business or politics, but for laughter, wine, and the comfort of companionship. But the sea has no regard for human plans. By the evening of August 18th, the weather shifted. Dark clouds crept across the horizon, and the Mayan's captain decided to move closer to Cefalù, hoping to outrun an approaching storm. The crew believed they had found a safe anchorage. By midnight, winds were still calm, just 9 miles per hour. A deckhand stood watch. For a while, the night seemed quiet, almost too quiet. By 3 a.m., the sky began to change. Clouds thickened. The sea started to stir. At 3:55 a.m., wind speed suddenly climbed to 35 miles per hour. The deckhand, sensing trouble, took out his phone and filmed the storm building over the water, posting the video online before securing equipment on deck. He had no idea it would be the last calm moment before catastrophe. At 4 a.m., the captain was jolted awake. Within minutes, the yacht was rocking violently. Crew scrambled, trying to hold the vessel steady. In the kitchen, Chef Ricardo Thomas was last seen securing supplies, determined to protect even the smallest details of order as chaos loomed. But by 4:06 a.m., the storm exploded into violence. Winds roared at more than 80 miles per hour. In just 15 seconds, the unimaginable happened. The Mayan tilted hard, rolling to a near 90-degree angle. Inside, guests and crew were thrown like rag dolls. One deckhand was hurled overboard into the Black Sea. Cabins became traps. Drawers, tables, and furniture turned into ladders as terrified passengers clawed their way upward into the saloon. Darkness, screams, crashing waves. The inside of the yacht became a maze of panic. Some fought their way to higher ground. Others never made it out. The captain shouted directions, urging survivors away from the most dangerous machinery. At 4:22 a.m., emergency beacons were activated. In the water, a crew member used a seat cushion to keep a baby afloat as others clung desperately to wreckage, their bodies battered by waves and wind. A life raft was released. Injured and exhausted, survivors dragged themselves in, firing flares into the night sky, their last fragile hope for salvation. At 4:53 a.m., a ship called the Sir Robert Baden-Powell spotted the signal. Against all odds, 15 people were pulled from the sea, shivering, bruised, half-dazed, but alive. For 7 others, help came too late. Among the dead was Mike Lynch himself, the man whose celebration had drawn everyone together. His daughter Hannah's body was recovered last, a young woman whose life had only just begun, now cut short before Oxford, before adulthood, before everything. Her mother, Angela, survived to tell of the horror, the tilt of the yacht, the sudden chaos, the scramble in the dark. Hannah's sister described her as joyful, thoughtful, loving, the kind of person who left brightness wherever she went. The Bloomers and the Murillos were also lost, found later inside the wreck. Investigators believed they had been trapped in air pockets, alive for a time, but unable to escape before the oxygen ran out. Ricardo Thomas, the chef, was remembered by friends in Antigua as warm, kind, and dedicated. His body was the first recovered, discovered near the wreck. The storm lasted just 16 minutes. 16 minutes to turn a luxury voyage into a fight for survival. 16 minutes to rip families apart. Investigators would later confirm that a fast-moving Medicane, a Mediterranean hurricane, had struck without warning. The yacht's keel had not been lowered, and safety gaps in the vessel's manual may have left the crew unprepared for how quickly it could lose stability. 3 crew members, including the captain, remain under investigation.
20-year-old Sinead McNamara was found entangled in a rope off of a yacht over the weekend.
August 30th, 2018. The Greek island of Kefalonia shimmered under the late summer sun, its turquoise waters glistening against white cliffs. But what should have been another picturesque day of luxury and adventure turned into a nightmare that still raises more questions than answers. Sinead McNamara was only 20 years old, a bright, adventurous young woman from Port Macquarie, Australia. Just 4 months earlier, she had sold everything she owned to chase a dream life at sea. That dream landed her on the Mayan Queen 4, a $190 million superyacht owned by Mexican mining billionaire Alberto Ballera. On Instagram, she shared glimpses of paradise, European coastlines, glamorous ports, carefree laughter. To her followers, it looked like she was living the dream. But behind those sunlit photos, something darker was unfolding. The day before her death, Sinead made a phone call home. Her family remembers it vividly, her voice trembling, tears in her words. She said she had just been in a serious argument with someone on board. That call chilled her loved ones because it wasn't like her. Sinead was strong, bubbly, resilient. Something had shaken her deeply. And then, almost like nothing had happened, she went out that night with other crew members in Argostoli. Witnesses say she danced, laughed, drank, and looked genuinely happy. To anyone watching, it seemed like the call never happened, but her family couldn't shake it. The next morning, horror struck. A passing boat noticed something hanging from the back of the Mayan Queen 4. It was Sinead, rope wrapped around her neck. She was still alive when crew members rushed to cut her down. For a brief moment, there was hope. She was airlifted to a hospital in Athens, but on the way, her heart stopped. Sinead never made it. What happened in those final hours remains an unsettling mystery. At the time of her death, the billionaire owner was nowhere near the yacht. He had left days earlier. Authorities boarded the vessel, interviewed the crew, and seized security footage said to capture Sinead's last moments. But here's the disturbing part. That footage has never been publicly released, not even to the coroner who examined her. The official ruling was hanging. No drugs in her system, no signs of a physical struggle, no obvious reason she would have wanted to end her life. Yet the coroner himself admitted something didn't add up. He hinted at the possibility of emotional pressure, of psychological manipulation. Her family, shattered and desperate for answers, refused to accept the simple explanation. They wanted to know, who was she fighting with? Why did she make that desperate phone call? Why was help too late? And most haunting of all, why was critical evidence kept out of sight? On social media, tributes poured in. Her final Instagram post captured a word she had just learned. Niebieski, Polish for blue. She called it her favorite word. It was the color of the sea, the sky, the very life she was chasing. But the story behind her last moments isn't so clear. It was early 2024 in Sydney, Australia. The glittering harbor with its endless luxury yachts held a dark secret that no one saw coming. On one of those boats, the Taloha, a 47-foot vessel worth $250,000, 2 lives came to a sudden, chilling end. Lixin Wang, a 60-year-old millionaire, and her on and off partner, Peter Ray, 56, had boarded the yacht for what seemed like a romantic getaway. But within days, both were found lying side by side, lifeless in the cabin. No blood, no visible injuries, just silence, and the heavy, suffocating scent that would lead police to one of the strangest cases Sydney had seen in years. Peter Ray wasn't a man of scandal. A plumber with a love for sailing, he had spent the past 18 months restoring the Taloha, preparing it for the famous Airlie Beach Race Week in Queensland. Friends said he was ready for a fresh start, ready to leave the past behind and begin again. His ex-wife Andrea, who shared 3 grown children with him, described him as a good father, committed even through separation. But on that yacht, Peter's dreams would die alongside the woman whose life was filled with secrets and controversy, because Lixin Wang's story was nothing like his. She had built her fortune through adult businesses in Sydney, running clubs like Flamingo and Xanadu Heaven, places whispered about for their glamour, their secrets, and their shadows. Former employees accused her of exploitation, of bending rules and cutting corners. Some said she owed them money. Others claimed she concealed identities from clients. Even the Flamingo Club itself carried a dark stain. It had once belonged to Luke Nesbitt, who ended up behind bars for drugs. When he fell, Wang rose, taking over the club and expanding her empire. By the time of her death, she had sold one of her properties for over $16 million, owned several more, and was still a name spoken with both envy and suspicion. That Monday, Wang and Ray had arrived at the marina separately, boarded the Taloha, and set out. It should have been a quiet escape on Sydney's lower north shore. But by Wednesday night, no one had heard from them. 2 days of silence, 2 days of unanswered calls. A worried friend finally alerted emergency services. When police stepped aboard the yacht anchored near Tunks Park, they were immediately struck by the smell. It was sharp, dangerous, the kind of smell that made them call in firefighters with breathing gear. And then came the discovery. 2 bodies, side by side in the main cabin. Investigators treated the scene as suspicious, not because of violence. There were no weapons, no signs of struggle, but because nothing made sense. Illegal substances and troubling items were found scattered on board. Gas cylinders were pulled from the cabin, and experts began whispering one possible answer: carbon monoxide, a silent killer. On a closed yacht with a faulty gas system, with the generator running for 2 days straight, toxic air could have filled the cabin without either of them realizing. Witnesses said they had heard the generator humming endlessly, but no one saw anyone leaving the yacht. Both of their cars still sat untouched at the marina. The official answers haven't come. Toxicology reports, post-mortem results, those are still pending, but the mystery only deepened with strange threads from Wang's past. Months earlier, a man linked to a tragic Bondi Mall incident had tried applying for a job at her club. Though rejected, it left investigators unsettled by the eerie connection. Was it coincidence or something darker?